The recent Wicked movie has got me thinking again. A dangerous prospect, I know, but it has me pondering adaptations. I feel like I have pretty cold takes about how adaptations should be handled, but I see so much discourse about the topic that I'm kind of curious if maybe I'm in the minority. So, without further ado, let's go over it. First and foremost, I believe adaptations should change from the source material. I think it is pretty obvious simply by the fact that if you just want the same thing again, the source material exists. It is the changes to the initial material that has you coming out to see the adaptation in the first place. When you turn on an anime adaptation of your favorite manga, it is the change from still images to animation that has you checking it out. If you just want the source material again, it already exists. Why would you just want the same thing again? I think an adaptation's job shouldn't be to input the source material directly into a new medium, but rather to capture the basic vibes, the essence of the material, and put it into a new medium. The Castlevania anime, despite being very different from the original games, I consider to be a damn good adaptation. It successfully captures the horror elements, the inherent sorrow of the Alucard-Dracula conflict, and the indomitable human spirit that comes from a dude with a whip staring down what is essentially a god. To me, these are much more important elements than anything else. If you wanted an honest-to-God faithful adaptation of the games, it would be Trevor silently walking around for most of the episode until he runs into a new character, where they exchange minor dialogue and then the episode ends. Now, doesn't that sound like a fucking terrible show? Which is why when people complain about the show not being faithful, I have to look at them like they're insane. Because what they're asking for is a fundamentally broken show concept. Now, what I just said is absolutely correct, but I'm not going to pretend I don't know what a lot of people mean when they say they want a faithful adaptation. Or at least what I think they mean, because honestly, some of these fuckers have Gordian knots of doublethink that are mutually exclusive. What I believe most people mean when they go down this dialogue tree is that they want an adaptation that is as close to being a direct lift of the characters as humanly possible. My issue with this line of logic is that in order to adapt most things between mediums, you'll have to make massive changes anyway. Books to movies, video games to shows, even manga to anime in a lot of cases. Yeah, bro, make an entire season of 30-minute episodes based on a character who only speaks to introduce themselves without making any drastic changes. Go on, let's see how well that pans out. If you're already going to make huge changes, I would argue that you might as well commit to that. The Lord of the Rings movies are widely considered to be some of the best adaptations of all time. But when you're adapting a fucking 22-hour book into a 3-hour movie, you have to cut things. There is the obvious stuff like Tom Bombadil, who is absolutely perfect and I love him, but blatantly doesn't fit into the serious fantasy action tone of the Jackson movies. There are more important scenes they had to cut as well, however. Like in the book, the hobbits have this great moment where they basically look at Frodo and say, "Listen man, we're your friends. We understand this is dangerous, but we're not gonna let you do this alone." Not only is this a really sweet scene and one of my favorites from the book, it's on brand for the overall themes of Lord of the Rings. Friendship between people is a core part of that story. The first fucking book is called The Fellowship. So this is a scene that is really solid, fits with the themes, and is a really nice bit of character development for our 4 short kings. And they cut it out. Which, much to my chagrin, I agree with that decision. There simply isn't enough time for it, and we can reinforce the bonds of friendship between our main cast later in the movie. Bear in mind, Jackson didn't just cut things, he went on to add in extra shit too. Nowhere in the books does it say, "And then Legolas did a sick-ass shield surf and took out like 4 orcs." In fact, the Battle of Helm's Deep, one of the best fantasy battles in movie history, is like a chapter long in the books. It's like a fucking footnote. To put an actual point to this incredibly long ramble, good adaptations don't just directly facelift from the source material, they add in extra content to fit into the particular medium they are in. For weebs, this is what we know as filler. Shit that wasn't in the original manga. And what I'm about to say may ruffle some feathers. Filler is necessary in order to make a good anime. This scene with Aki doing his daily routine, filler. This episode in DBZ where they ride cars, filler. The G8 arc from the One Piece anime that is so good people don't even realize it's filler? Well, yeah, it's filler. I literally just said that. I hope you understand my point here. People often have a negative opinion of filler, or just content that wasn't in the source material in general, because it's mishandled. Your issue is not with filler. Your issue is with boring writing and people not giving a shit. If all filler was as good as the G8 arc, filler wouldn't be considered a goddamn slur to anime fans. Now, I want to move on to a broader mindset about adaptations that I've noticed has creeped up into the popular mind space that I kind of completely hate. Okay, so there's this really good content creator called Alt-Shift-X, and he makes videos comparing books to their movie or show adaptations, mostly doing in Game of Thrones. I love his videos. I think they're excellent analysis, but one thing that drives me up the wall is this text right here. The real Jon Snow, or the real Dune. Now, how much of this is evocative titling to get people to click on the video, and how much of this is an actual genuine belief that the source material is the real version is anyone's guess. The point here is that I despise this type of verbiage because it is implicitly anti-adaptation. By claiming that the books are the real version, you're implying that the other adaptations are fakes, and therefore deceptions of some kind. Oh, don't bother with this fake garbage. Only the real version is worth your time. It gives some inherently negative connotations to any adaptations of these works. To be clear, this is just about the titles here. Within the actual videos themselves, I don't get the impression he thinks these adaptations are inherently worse. He definitely seems to prefer the books, at least that's just the vibes I get from his videos, but not to the extent that they would just by divine right of being the source material be inherently better. Again, this is just what I get from his videos. I don't actually know what he truly thinks or believes on the subject. The only reason I'm picking on the title specifically is because I think this is a sentiment that has actually been picked up by broader media discourse. A good example of this in recent times is Starship Troopers. I'm going to describe an interaction I've seen play out way too many goddamn times. The humans, the Starship Troopers, did nothing wrong. Wait, isn't Starship Troopers blatantly satire and the humans are portrayed as the bad guys? The book wasn't, therefore the movie doesn't matter. From there, it's a choose your own adventure of how that pans out, but I hope you understand my point here. Well, wait a second, you might say. Couldn't you just specify that you're talking about the movie and end the discussion right then and there? To which I would say is completely reasonable. I think most people would find that completely reasonable. My problem is that if you earnestly believe that a source material automatically supersedes its adaptations, then specifying you were talking about the movie doesn't mean anything. Remember what Book Guy was saying. The movie doesn't matter. The argument is that the intentions and messages of the original creator and source should always take priority over other adaptations. In other words, the book is the real version and the movie is the fake. At the end of the day, I don't really believe in a real version of either story. They're both separate adaptations and deserve to be analyzed as their own separate thing. You might like one over the other, but they're both equally valid. And if I'm being intellectually honest, this also has to apply to adaptations I personally don't care for. I don't like the normal cut of the Justice League movie, but it's still Justice League, and no amount of me being upset about it is going to change that fact. The same way, no matter how much it might upset me, Elon Musk is the shadow president. That's just the world we live in. Now, something else to consider in the cesspool of adaptation is that while I consider an adaptation of a story to be an individual work deserving of analysis, I would also consider translations the same. A YouTuber by the name of Exclamation Point has a damn good video highlighting this point by going over the sub and dub of My Hero Academia, but I believe in being able to argue your points firsthand, so I'll do exactly that. This seems like an extremely self-evident point to me, but for those of you wondering why I think this, just look at JJK as an example. You have incredibly obvious culprits like the infamous "nah, I'd win," but then you have other panels that have small but vastly impactful changes. This panel right here is a perfect example. Talent equal to Gojo implies that Gojo was a complete fraud, only getting hard carried by his OP abilities. A reminder that this dude has had his powers for about 2 weeks, and wasn't even a combatant before this. He was a fucking lawyer. Meaning that some pencil-pushing nerd who got lucky with a good ability was able to catch up to Gojo's raw talent in 2 weeks. Homie has been raised his entire life to be the pinnacle of the sorcerer world, and that bar of talent was reached in 2 weeks. Needless to say, Gojo is not dodging the fraud allegations in this version. Now let's take a look at another translation. Rivals is a large range. Considering Gojo is the peak of JJK's world until this point, even if Higuruma were just 75% as talented as Gojo, you could reasonably say he rivals Gojo. It allows there to be a gap between him and Gojo while still looking impressive. Just from this one dialogue change, we have huge implications, and it's why I have to ask, so how different do you think even the most faithful of translations are versus their original Japanese counterparts? English and Japanese are horribly different. There is no shot that a translation of one language to another is ever going to contain the complete context of a story. You might capture the general vibes, you might even capture direct sentences or statements, but you will not capture the entirety of the context needed. Some things are simply going to be lost in translation, and that's okay. We all ultimately have to accept that as anime or manga fans, unless you actually speak Japanese, what you're consuming is really an interpretation of the work filtered through a localization team to make sense to your English-speaking brain. Now, I generally have a pretty high opinion of people's competence, so I'm willing to gamble that the general vibes of a story are being captured well. I don't know that for certain, because I sure as fuck don't speak Japanese, so I have no way of confirming either way if the story is being faithfully adapted. It's just a buy-in I simply have to accept. To be clear, this also pertains to subs and English translations of manga. They might be closer, but that's just it. They're closer. They're not the genuine article. Guys, I'm gonna take a wild guess that Gohan didn't actually call Boo retarded. You know, just a gut feeling, just a vibe check on that one, but I'm gonna say that's probably not what he said in Japanese. This, amongst other reasons, is why I don't really give a fuck about keeping 100% true to an author's original vision when it comes to anime. None of us have ever actually experienced the creator's true artistic vision. It is forever gatekept by language. This is why whenever people quote scripture at me, I have to look at them very suspiciously. Like, they'll point to a passage and go, look here, this supports my argument. And I'll have to look at them, raise my eyebrows, and go, oh really? It said that in the original Hebrew. Because remember, the Bible's ancient. It wasn't written in plain English. It's been translated more times than I can count. There's probably a ton of differences between the original draft of the Bible and whatever translation you happen to be familiar with. And if this book is claiming to be the word of God, why would I accept the translation over its original draft? This brings us to an interesting subject. How much of the original creator's input do you take into consideration? As in, if you're adapting a work into another medium, do you take the elements that mean the most to you, that you think make the story shine? Or do you try to abide by the original creator's vision, keeping to the elements they thought were most meaningful? It's probably obvious at this point, but I definitely fall into the camp of take what matters to you, the person adapting it. As not only do I think an adaptation should be a separate work from its source, but on a basic lexicon level, that's how we refer to them. It's John Carpenter's The Thing, not just The Thing. Yeah, for those of you not in the know, this horror classic is actually a remake of The Thing from Another World from the 1950s. I wouldn't blame you for not knowing that, of course, because it's John Carpenter's version that is undoubtedly the more well-known. It inspired Among Us, for God's sake. Its influence cannot be understated. Movies like John Carpenter's The Thing are a perfect encapsulation of what I'm talking about. It's an adaptation that is more critically renowned from its source material, it's obviously had a strong cultural impact, and it's widely regarded as the definitive version of this story. But it's not the original novella, so I guess we shouldn't talk about it. Hey, I usually don't talk at the end of these, but I needed to do a special shout out to my boy Swabby Swab, who helped edit this video. I also wanted to announce my fiance's store. You can check out that down in the description below. Look at that handsome devil. And that's it. I guess I'll see you later.